let's talk about the presidential election and how this thing's actually going to play out in the next few months. So to win the presidency, you have to have 270 electoral college votes. Those electoral college votes are split up amongst all the 50 states. You have to have 270 of them to win as president. A lot of these states are solidly blue or solidly red, and so you end up with about 5 states that actually matter. Now, there's this cool site called 270towin.com, and that allows you to manipulate different states and see what the outcomes would be if that state were to go blue or red. Now, they have these pre-selected 5 states as the states that are sort of battleground states. I would probably add Georgia in there, although I tend to agree with them that Georgia is leaning towards red right now and most likely will end up going for Donald Trump. Now, what kind of throws a wrench in that is that, remember, Georgia did elect blue senators, right? And that was right after the 2020 election. An argument can be made, which I find compelling, that the only reason that happened is because Donald Trump told his voters that the election was rigged and not to go to the polls, and many of them did not. Had the same people who voted for Donald Trump voted then for a Republican senator, Georgia would have no Democratic senators. So I think that's a good argument, and most likely those people are going to go to the polls when it's Donald Trump on the ballot. Regardless of the election's rigged conversation, they likely will go to the polls, and so the election likely will go to Donald Trump. So we end up with these 5 states. We have Pennsylvania, Michigan, Arizona, Wisconsin, and Nevada. And depending on what happens in these states, and these are states that had narrow margins in the last election. So in 2020, these states had narrow margins. Some of them were, 10,000 or so, some were 50,000 or so. In states this size, that's the difference between a snowstorm in the wrong place, right? Something happens that makes people stay home and your election changes by 10,000 votes. So these are very toss-up states. Now, on this site, 270towin.com, you can kind of choose which way you think these are going to go. And so let's just do that really quick, and then it'll show us, knock it off. It'll show us what would happen if that were the case. So Pennsylvania, for example, let's say Pennsylvania goes red. Now, I think that's probably unlikely, but let's say that Pennsylvania goes red. And let's see how the Democrats can win. They cannot. Pennsylvania is a must-win state for Democrats. If they lose Pennsylvania, they lose this election. And that's really interesting. So if I was the Republicans, I would be putting a ton of money into campaigning in Pennsylvania, because if you can motivate some people who don't vote to come out and vote red, you can win this election by simply winning one of these toss-up states. On the same token, for the Democrats to win, they have to be putting money into Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania has been a pretty solidly blue state in the past, but it's not anymore. You have a lot of working class sort of blue collar voters in Pennsylvania that once upon a time just sort of voted with the union, but not anymore. They're seeing the same shift that you're seeing in Michigan and Wisconsin, where those blue collar voters are starting to move much more towards the sort of populist rhetoric that Trump brings to the table, and away from the sort of democratic values that they used to sort of align with. So Pennsylvania is a really interesting state. Like I said, if the Republicans can take Pennsylvania, they take the election. That's all it would take for them. Now, let's go with the more likely scenario, in my opinion, that Pennsylvania goes blue. That doesn't mean that the Democrats win. The Democrats start this thing out at a disadvantage. There are more electoral votes locked in for the Republicans from the get-go than there are for the Democrats. So there are more combinations for the Republicans to win than there are for the Democrats to win. And that's something to watch for. So let's say Pennsylvania goes blue. If Pennsylvania goes blue, Democrats still have to win Michigan and Arizona, or Michigan and Wisconsin, or Arizona, Wisconsin, and Nevada. So if the Democrats lose Michigan, they only have one combination. They have to win all three other states. So for Republicans only have to win two. They can win Michigan and Arizona, Michigan and Wisconsin, Michigan and Nevada, and even if Pennsylvania and one other state go to the Democrats, it doesn't matter. Republicans only have to win two of these five if they get Michigan. Now, let's say Michigan also goes blue. That means that the Republicans have to win Arizona and Wisconsin, even if Nevada also goes blue. So you see that the Republicans have more pathways, right? They only need two of these states to still win in a lot of these combinations. Whereas for the Democrats to win, they sometimes need four of these states in order to be able to win, depending on how the Republicans, which states they take. Now, like I said, you can play around with these. You can see how this would go. So, for example, if the Republicans only win Nevada and Michigan, and remember, Nevada was very close the last election, and Michigan was very close the last election. If the Republicans happen to take those two, it doesn't matter if the Democrats take all the rest of them. Now, what is interesting is Michigan and Wisconsin will almost certainly break the same way. And so if Michigan goes for the Republicans, it's almost certain that Wisconsin will too, because those states are very, very similar demographically and in sort of the way that they vote and the way they do politics are very similar states. So in my opinion, it's really going to come down to Michigan and Wisconsin, because I think those two states are going to move together, and whoever gets them is going to win. Because remember, if we put Pennsylvania back in neutral territory, if the Democrats win Michigan and Wisconsin, the Republicans would have to win Pennsylvania to win. And I think that's an unlikely scenario, right? Just given what has happened in recent elections, the midterm elections and the 2020 election in Pennsylvania, I think that's a pretty safe blue state. If the Democrats can take Michigan and Wisconsin and Pennsylvania, they've got it in the bag. Okay? But if these two states go red, there's nothing the Democrats can do. If Michigan and Wisconsin go red, it's the Republicans. The Democrats can't win, regardless of whether they win Pennsylvania. So for the Democrats, it is pivotal. They have to win these two states, and they have to win Pennsylvania. Arizona and Nevada, sort of the cherry on top. Because even if the Democrats win Pennsylvania and Arizona and Nevada, but they lose Michigan and Wisconsin, they lose the whole thing. And like I said, I think those two will vote the same way. As I listen to political news and people say that states are leaning one way or the other, I come on here and I change some colors on some things and see what does that actually mean in the context of things. And as you're thinking about Kamala Harris and her, presumptive nomination to be the Democrat running against Donald Trump, it doesn't really matter how she's doing in any other state other than Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. Everything else is superfluous. And so pay special attention to the polls coming out of Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, showing how Kamala Harris is doing in those states against Donald Trump. And I wouldn't be surprised if she chooses, say, the governor of Pennsylvania as her running mate to try and lock in some of these states that are so essential and critical to her win. If Kamala Harris is beating Donald Trump in a national popularity contest, that doesn't really matter. It only matters if she can beat him in those three states. So pay attention to the polls coming out of those three states, because that's going to tell you a lot more than any of the national polls, any of the polls of approval within parties, or anything else. All that matters are those three states.